It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. Do you ever wonder what actually makes an organization achieve Agile success? Is it when you take the time to revisit and think about where you are and you start trying to decide if installing new or different agile practices or just changing the way you do things, or maybe adopting an agile mindset or an open mindset or a culture, are those the things that really make us agile, or are those the things that really help? Now, I would argue that those are all really great ideas and things that you should do. But also, I think one of the biggest things you can do to help yourself is one of the 12 steps from the Agile Dad 12 step program. Now, this is going to catch people off guard because all the first 11 steps are incredibly important. But the 12th step in the 12-step program talks about identifying key issues that are still outstanding and addressing the core key issues instead. Now, what I can tell you is that when we share this with executives or leaders, they tend to feel like it's different than what they expected, or it's shocking, or it wasn't exactly what they had in mind. And what I can tell you is, while it was never intended to be shock fest or shock factor, there are a lot of organizations who focus so much on mechanics and so much on establishing the perfect culture that they forget that in order for any of those things to be effective, even if you pick the most effective of everything, in order for any of those to work, you need to make sure that you are taking care of the things that are holding you back, whether it's debt, whether it's outstanding issues. I was recently in an organization that had a lot of debt. Now, when I say debt, I'm careful because I don't necessarily just mean defects in code, right? In fact, this organization didn't build software, but they just had a lot of outstanding debt, a lot of promises that weren't met, a lot of expectations that people were still waiting for, a lot of cross dependencies with other teams for things that they were supposed to deliver. There was just a lot of outstanding debt. And I feel like if you have debt as a core issue, for example, then that's something you need to address. If your teams are constantly changing and people are shifting from one priority to another and you have continuous context switching, that's another form of debt. How about this one? If you have too many things in the air at any given time, whether it's too many products or too many projects, ideally we'd love to be focused on one thing at a time. But even if that's impossible, can we reduce or limit the number of things that we have in progress so that we can see a clear path to where we're trying to go? And I think the deficiency here is that most organizations don't take the time to focus on core issues because they're so busy doing additional work. And it just reminds me of a story I once heard. And this is a pretty cool story. There was a 55-year-old man and a 22-year-old man who are both competing in a competition to see who could chop down the most trees in this wooded area. Now, before you get on me about the environment, it was already predestined that this area had to be cleared in order to build a wildlife rehabilitation facility. So it was for a good cause. So the two guys decided they were going to compete and see who could chop down the most trees. Now, the young buck, he was sure that he had there was no way that this older man was going to take him down and beat him. So he knew exactly how much time he had. He had a 24-hour period, and he says, "I'm going to work really, really hard for as many hours as I can." He says, "And then I'll take a small rest." He says, "And then I'll get up and work some more." He says, "That way I can, certainly beat." He says, I know I can do more." And what he noticed was that the older gentleman who was working further away, that every 30 to 40 minutes, this guy would walk past him for a 10-minute break. And he just started dying laughing at one point. He's like, "There's no way he's going to cut down more trees than me if every 30 or 40 minutes he's taking a 10-minute break," right? I mean, you could do the math. 10 minutes every 30 minutes in a whole day, he's potentially taking a lot of time off, right? Plus, never mind if he's going to take a rest and sleep. So, at the conclusion of the competition, the young man was happy to report that he had cut down with his axe, right? 'Cause we have to make it old school. With his axe, he cut down 24 trees, and everyone was erupting in applause. That was a very good job. So they got to the older gentleman and asked him how many trees he cut down. And he says, with my axe, I was only able to cut down 112 trees. And the guy's like, "How did you do that? That doesn't make any sense." And the comment that the older gentleman made back was, he says, "Well, he says, while you were sitting there chopping down trees, he says, every half hour or so, I go back and sharpen my axe." And it sounds so obvious when you hear the story, right? But I think there's too many organizations that are operating with a dull axe. They're operating with good intention, and they know exactly what they need to do. But with a dull axe, you're not going to get very far. So I guess the message I have for you today is, or question: how can we sharpen our axe? How can we be better at focusing on core issues? How can we be better guided? And the answer is simple. Without sounding self-serving, most organizations that I go into, I get one comment pretty consistently, and that comment is, "We're so glad we brought you in because we might not have ever been able to see this deficiency from the inside." And I think sometimes it's just a matter of having an outside set of eyes that can look into what's going on, to look into what's happening in the organization, that can shed light on things for you so that you can be brought up to speed and made aware of the things that are happening inside the organization that maybe your eyes are too closed to see. And if you can successfully get to the point where you are implementing change and doing the things that you need to do, and you're taking care of all the issues, what's going to happen is the culture will start to build itself and the teams will start to gain efficiency and everything else just kind of falls into place. So I guess my message is, if you have a bunch of outstanding things that you should be worried about or working on, how about we address those first? And then once we address those, then we can start talking about all those other things that need to fall into place in order to make things work. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, remember you can email us at learnmore@agiledad.com, where we'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.